Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a really baffling incident from 1995. It all kicked off with some panicked 911 calls, led to a police officer chasing down an unidentified object. And then, things got really weird when it seemed like the object started chasing him. Okay, so let's just jump right in. The story begins in Trumbull County, Ohio, with that exact quote, a plea to a 911 dispatcher. You can just hear the fear in that person's voice, right? They are looking at something in the sky that is definitely, absolutely not your average airplane. So this is where it all officially begins. A flood of 911 calls starts to paint this chaotic, really confusing picture of something strange happening in the skies over this small Ohio county. And things escalated fast. I mean, really fast. At 12:30 in the morning, the first calls come in about this hovering object. But just 5 minutes later, it wasn't just residents anymore. Local news outlets were already calling the 911 dispatch, trying to figure out what was going on. That's when they decide, okay, we need to send someone out there, and they dispatch Officer Toby Morrow. Now, here's what's so interesting. Right from the get-go, the stories don't quite line up. You have citizens on the phone talking about these blue and green lights, and they all keep saying the same thing. It made no noise. It was totally silent. But Officer Morrow's first report over the radio, he sees a single pulsating red light, and his first description is simply real big. So to make things even stranger, the dispatcher does exactly what you'd expect. They call a nearby military airbase. They ask, hey, are you guys seeing anything weird on your radar? And the answer comes back a hard no. Their screens are totally clear. So whatever this thing was, official military technology was telling them it just wasn't there. All right, now we're getting to the absolute heart of the story. This is the moment a pretty routine call about some weird lights in the sky turns into something else entirely. Something that would stick with this police officer for the rest of his life. So Officer Morrow gets to Sampson Drive, and right away he's flagged down by an elderly man who's just out walking his dog. And the guy is clearly spooked, pointing up at the sky, basically confirming, yeah, that thing you're looking for, it was right over my house just a second ago. Morrow drives just a little further down the road, maybe a quarter of a mile, and then everything just stops. The engine dies, his radio goes completely silent, the lights flicker out, his entire patrol car is dead in the water, leaving him totally powerless on this dark, empty road. For 4.5 minutes, dispatch heard nothing but static from Officer Morrow. Now that might not sound like a lot of time, but on a police radio, that is an eternity. For all they knew, their officer had vanished. It was a complete communication blackout. And it kicked off a huge response. Other cars started racing to his position, probably fearing the absolute worst. So what happened during that radio silence? Well, Officer Morrow got out of his car, and he said he was just confronted by this massive, intensely bright light, just hovering about 100 feet over the trees. It was so bright, he said, it was like staring straight into the sun. And all he could do was just stand there with his hand on his gun, thinking, what on earth am I looking at? He figures it was about 45 seconds that he stood there. And then, just as suddenly as it all began, it was over. The object just took off. It accelerated to an incredible speed and vanished. And here's the real kicker. It did it without making a single sound. The second it was gone, his car's power just came back on, all by itself. You know, this story didn't just end that night. Years later, the people at the center of it all, the 911 operator and Officer Morrow, told their stories again. And looking back on it with years of perspective, their testimony adds some really powerful new layers to this whole event. The 911 operator, a woman named Royanne Malik, was so captivated by all the calls coming in that she actually went outside with another officer to see it for herself. She described this silent, almost undulating light that then all of a sudden just left. Her words were that it shot like a bullet. It moved in a way that was completely impossible by any standards she knew. And this really gets us to the core of the mystery, doesn't it? Okay, so some of the details are a little different. The color of the lights, for example. But the fundamental things they saw were all perfectly consistent. It was silent, it could hover in place, and it could move at unbelievable speeds. Every single person was sure they had seen something that just couldn't be explained. But this might be the strangest piece of the entire puzzle. About 2.5 months after the incident, Officer Morrow tried to do some follow-up investigating. He went back to the airbase, and he discovered that every single person who was working there on the night of the sighting had been transferred. Every last one of them, gone. So, with all of this incredible testimony on the table, we're still left with the one giant question. What was it? Let's take a look at some of the most common theories that have popped up over the years to try and make some sense of what happened.
All right, theory number one is the simplest one. It's the idea that this was all just a big mistake, that all these people, a trained police officer included, simply saw a bright star or a planet and their imaginations ran wild. But honestly, when you look at the evidence, that theory just falls apart almost immediately.
I mean, think about it. A star doesn't shoot across the sky like a bullet. It doesn't hover 100 feet above the trees, and it certainly doesn't have the power to shut down a car's entire electrical system. Plus, people described a large physical shape, not just a distant point of light. So yeah, this explanation, it just doesn't fit the facts. Okay, now for a theory that feels a lot more plausible. In fact, it's the one that Officer Morrow himself eventually came to believe. The idea is that this was some kind of advanced, top-secret military aircraft out on a test flight. I mean, this was the era of the stealth bomber, so it's not totally out of the question. This theory, it definitely has some things going for it. A stealth plane could explain why it didn't show up on radar, and maybe it had some kind of new electromagnetic pulse weapon that could disable a car, but it also has some really big problems. For one, total silence. Even stealth planes make noise. And the biggest issue? It doesn't explain how the object could just hover, completely motionless, before taking off. So, in the end, we're left right back where we started. We have this collection of powerful, credible, and consistent stories from eyewitnesses, but absolutely zero official explanation, no physical proof. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? In a situation like this, when the technology has nothing and the officials have no answers, how much is an eyewitness account really worth? What do you believe when all you have is what someone saw with their own two eyes?